I'm really pleased to be joined on Not the Andrew Marr Show by Craig Murray. How are you doing, Craig?
Fine, thanks. Very well. Good. Yep.
Have you been moving around from country to country and not obviously you can't get back into the UK? Has that been a problem?
It's it has been a problem. I'm very briefly back in the UK at the time of recording this, but not for very long. But I've been moving around as an itinerant terrorist for the last few months. It's quite interesting because we increasingly think that my detention and questioning under the Terrorism Act was actually a pretext for gathering information that they want to use under the new National Security Act, which would explain why so much of the questioning was about finances and financial information and where I and various organizations get money from. Anyway, we've come to the conclusion that's probably the main thrust of the investigation rather than anything actually to do with terrorism, because obviously I have no connection of terrorism of any kind. So the Terrorism Act, of course, gives them exceptional powers to get information that otherwise they'd have to go to court and try and get a warrant for.
Right, so you're in the UK now?
I am at this moment, yeah.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's a brief visit.
So the case, obviously, the Julian Assange's final appeal hearing is on Tuesday and Wednesday. Will you be able to get to the court? What's your plan for them?
Yep, I do have a plan for them, and I hope. Well, I hope to be able to get to the court. I may be wearing a dress and a bright orange wig and a wooden leg, but I do hope to get to the court.
Right, this sounds like something, a thriller. Because this final appeal hearing, I mean, I'd just like to find out more about what we expect to happen at this. It's 2 days. Seems like a long time to have a short decision made, and obviously all this stuff's already gone through. Why is it taking 2 days for them to make this decision on whether he gets extradited straight away or whether there's another appeal at the High Court?
Well, this will be the only time that Julian's arguments have been heard on appeal. Previously, what happened was that, if you recall, the Magistrates' Court ruled against his extradition on grounds of health, and health combined with the conditions of United States prisons. The United States appealed against that ruling, and the United States appeal was heard over a couple of days, and the United States won that appeal. But Julian had never had a chance in that hearing to introduce the other points that were dismissed at the Magistrates' Court, particularly the points on freedom of speech, the points on the CIA attempts to have him assassinated, their interest in having him assassinated, in having taking various actions like kidnap against him, the fact that the main witness for the prosecution is a guy who has admitted he was paid $10,000 for his evidence, and is a convicted fraudster and convicted paedophile. The fact that the extradition treaty outlaws political extradition, which is perhaps the most important point of all of these, and the fact that he won't be permitted in the US court to plead the First Amendment freedom of speech, because they've said that only applies to US citizens, which is plainly prejudicial. The court would be prejudiced against him. He wouldn't have the same rights in court as other people. So all these appeal points have never been heard on appeal. They were dismissed by the Magistrates' Court. They have never been heard on appeal. So in fact, really 2 days is a very short time for the evidence behind all of these to be heard. There's never been a higher court look at these arguments before this week. So they will be run through, and there are 6 or 7 points that I've just enumerated, and they're not the only ones. Each of them has supporting evidence, of course. They'll be gone through extremely quickly by the legal team, and then the United States will respond, and then the judges will withdraw to make a decision.
So it's Julian's team facing the United States lawyers.
Yes, exactly. The lawyers are representing the United States.
Right, I see. Right, I didn't understand that. As you say, so some of these cases that before we've just heard whether he'd be safe if he was extradited, whether the United States would. They gave assurances that he'd be treated well and he'd have a fair hearing, but that limited the scope of the appeals. This is a full range of issues that you've just outlined. So that's interesting. So what do you think? Do you think the court? I mean, do you think the court will be biased towards the United States? Do you believe in the integrity of the UK judges? Have you got any insight into that?
No, I don't believe in the least in the integrity of the UK legal system. I mean, anybody who has sat through the initial hearings could have no possible belief in the integrity of the United Kingdom's legal system. The very fact that he's being extradited under a treaty that specifically bans political extradition, and he's being extradited under that treaty, and yet the argument which judges have accepted so far is that the treaty has no force, that the treaty has no force in UK law. So whether it says that political extradition is not allowed or not is irrelevant, because the terms of the treaty do not apply because it's not UK domestic legislation. Well, if it has no force, how can it be extradited under the treaty? It really is an astonishing argument. The lawyers, the judges have bent themselves backwards to extradite him. But the fact that, and this is one of the points which will come up on appeal, his confidential legal consultations with his legal team were spied on in the Ecuadorian embassy by the CIA. And remember, this case is the United States against Julian Assange. It is in the court, in the UK court. It will be Julian Assange versus the United States, not versus the government of the United Kingdom. And you've got one party which has spied on the legal consultations of the other party. In any other case, that would have the case dismissed instantly. Right. Plainly, this is fixed. Also, very, very good article by Mark Curtis in Declassified, on the Declassified website today, which points out that the judge who's going to be hearing the case this week is the sister of the guy who lent Boris Johnson £600,000, which and then became chairman of the BBC. That says something about the affiliations, let us say, of the people in this case, and that's the way that the British establishment works. The judge who dismissed the health grounds reason for not extraditing was the best friend and ex-college roommate of the Foreign Office Minister Alan Duncan, who was the guy who was in charge of Julian's removal from the embassy. These are Tory judges who are intimately part of the Tory establishment. So there's just simply no way there's going to be any kind of fair hearing. I personally think the whole thing is a farce and a charade.
And so, what are the global implications? People are saying that if he gets extradited, then all journalists will be under the same cost. So they could be taken away from any country and appealed by any country can demand their extradition on similar grounds. Do you see it as having global implications? What's happening in the UK court?
Well, I think more importantly, the United States is claiming universal jurisdiction here. Remember, Julian wasn't in the United States at any stage during any of the things that happened, which have led to the extradition. And he wasn't the whistleblower. He was merely the publisher. He was given leaked documents by a US citizen, and the US citizen, Chelsea Manning, was imprisoned for that, which is something, fate that whistleblowers face, unfortunately. But Julian wasn't in the United States. He's not an American citizen. He was given the documents and he published them abroad. The United States is here claiming the ability to persecute, to bring to trial, to sentence to life imprisonment anybody anywhere in the world who publishes something it doesn't like them to publish. So that's extremely difficult. There is an argument that having done this for the United States, how do we then refuse similar requests from Russia or China or from anywhere else? And that's true. It certainly opens the doors to political extradition. And if we're saying that the political extradition ban in the treaty doesn't count, then how can we then stop? How can we then say we won't extradite Hong Kong dissidents to China? We can't say that because it would be political extradition. Well, we've just said there's no domestic law stopping political extradition. So it is a terrible precedent that way. That particular argument, in a sense, I'm less impressed by, because we all know that, in fact, the British government wouldn't do it. They're just totally hypocritical. This isn't actually a question of justice and the rule of law. If it were China asking for a Hong Kong dissident, they would say no. As it's America asking for an Australian dissident, they're saying yes, because it's not actually about the rule of law. It's about power politics.
The legal system of this country is obviously being shown up a bit by Assange, or it's definitely been shown up by what's happening with Assange. But do you think the ICJ as well, that they just have no teeth? They just can't do anything. The world powers, the US, and in this case, and in Israel's case, they can do whatever they like, and the legal system doesn't have any hold on it.
We will see. We will see how it works too. I mean, certainly the ICJ doesn't have hard power. It doesn't have the ability to send in an army and stop the genocide in Gaza. But we've already seen some repercussions. For example, a court in the Netherlands has ruled that the Netherlands is not allowed to send F-16 fighter jet parts to Israel because of the possible genocide in Gaza. We may see legal challenges like that start to work in the UK as well. And when the ICJ ultimately brings in a decision of genocide, it will no longer be possible. And remember, it was just a preliminary hearing so far. The actual substantive case won't be for a couple of years, probably. But eventually there will be a ruling that this is a genocide. And it will then no longer be possible for the International Criminal Court, which is a terribly corrupt organization, but it will no longer be possible for the International Criminal Court to ignore the genocide and fail to bring charges. If the ICJ rules this is a genocide, then the ICC will have to bring charges against individuals. And this is why, when I spoke to diplomats in Geneva about this in early December, and was asking diplomats there why their countries were not bringing a case to the International Court of Justice. The reason was well understood in the diplomatic community. The reason was that they felt Israel would be found guilty genocide, and that would lead to eventually the ICC having to prosecute people like Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak for complicity in genocide. It's a series of events, but it's very difficult to stop once it gets going. That's why no country other than South Africa had the balls to actually bring the prosecution in the first place, because the possible repercussions are actually quite spectacular. But it's going to take. It's not an end to the immediate problem. It's for the wheels of justice grinding slowly. But I do think people shouldn't be despondent about the ICJ and its eventual ramifications, which will be very far-reaching indeed, unless the US and the UK and others come out and totally repudiate the system. Say we are repudiating the United Nations, we are repudiating the International Court of Justice, we are actually going to dismantle the entire system of international law. And I think the establishments of those countries might balk at that. We will see. But this is going to take years to work through, I'm afraid. It's not something that's going to help the people of Gaza enormously in the next week or two.
I mean, there's another thing I noticed you talked about in some of your tweets, one of your tweets in particular, where you said that most of the Arab states are in the pocket of the United States. Would that include Egypt? Because this plan that's been sort of, I don't know, leaked or something about how they're building an area in the Sinai Desert for people from Gaza to come into. I mean, is that of Egypt in some way working in tandem with the Israelis and the United States to create that?
Absolutely. I mean, Egypt is completely in the pocket of the United States. We shouldn't. It's a few years back, but remember, the only head of state of Egypt ever to be democratically elected, President Morsi, was overthrown in a military coup, a CIA-sponsored military coup, by the present dictator of Egypt, General Sisi. And Morsi had actually removed a lot of the restrictions on the border fence between Egypt and Palestine and made life much easier for the citizens of Gaza. As soon as Sisi came into power, they started building actual walls and demolishing tunnels and making the border much harder. And Egypt has been absolutely collaborating with Israel in the siege of Gaza. The government of Israel, the government of Egypt, the dictator was installed with CIA and Israeli help. And the president of Egypt is totally a United States puppet. There's just no other word for it.
Wow, that's something that's not really been talked about as far as I don't see much of that coming out. Do you think there's something very dark about this idea of Egypt building this space for people from Gaza?
Yeah, I think ethnic cleansing has obviously been the goal of Israel throughout, and the extent to which there has been United States complicity in that behind the scenes, I'm not 100% certain of. I'm not absolutely sure that the United States at the start of this current phase gave the wink to Israel to go ahead and ethnically cleanse the whole of Gaza. I'm sure there are people within the US administration for whom that is a goal, but it's been very obviously the goal. The infrastructure of the Gaza Strip has been destroyed. Hospitals have been destroyed, all of them. Schools have been destroyed. Bakeries have just been destroyed. The infrastructure of everyday life has been destroyed to an extent that makes it very, very difficult for the population to hang on there. And plainly, this has been done with a firm intent of complete ethnic cleansing and a new Israeli takeover and settlement of the Gaza Strip. And things are happening behind the scenes that we don't see. I mean, the withdrawal of aid from UNWRA, again, is plainly part of trying to make it impossible for Palestinians to stay in Gaza. And one thing I want to say about that is that major decisions like closing down UNWRA, withdrawing Western funding from UNWRA, governments don't make major decisions like that in 3 or 4 hours' time. You know, having been on the inside in the Foreign Office for years, that decision would take weeks to make. There would be submissions going up and down to ministers being discussed among different civil servants. Several different government departments would have to be consulted on the possible ramifications of it for their sphere of interest. The fact that so many Western powers all announced the cutting of aid to UNWRA within 6 hours of the ICJ decision on provisional measures coming out. That was coordinated a long way in advance. You know, this is part of a plan, a coordinated plan of which Western governments are a part.
Wow. It gets darker and darker. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us what's going on, because I'm not up on all this, and you seem to be the best person to speak to on it. Look, I'm going to be at the Royal Courts of Justice next week, and I'll look out for you in your dress and whatever disguise you're wearing. Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming on, Craig.
Thank you for having me. And I'm not sure I'm the best person to speak about all this, but I'm certainly always very happy to do so.